So have you ever noticed how in a sci-fi or fantasy setting, picking humans is like the last choice you'd want to make? Okay, so in a lot of very famous sci-fis or fantasy settings, like Warhammer, Halo, or Lord of the Rings, which are the three I'll be focusing on, humans are kind of like, they're just annoying. They're not a big threat unless we're genetically modified and wearing power armor, in which case we are. But in a one-on-one, just a standard human versus a standard other race, we're probably going to lose. Okay, let's pick on dwarves for a minute. So, how are dwarves really different from humans? Well, they're shorter biologically speaking, stockier, more muscular, and have more endurance. So they like to have heavy weapons, axes, hammers, which doesn't make a lot of sense for dwarves because they're already at a range disadvantage. Why would you give them an axe, which is just if you're over here, the dwarf is over here, you can hit that dwarf, but he can't hit you. Give him a spear or something. So to get to that level of endurance that dwarves, as a generalizing of course, that dwarves are at, humans need to put a lot more work into exercise, protein. They didn't have protein shakes in the Lord of the Rings universe, as far as I'm aware. I haven't done a lot of reading on the lore, so maybe, but I don't know. Maybe you can just use some sort of magic. So dwarves have to put in a lot less effort to get to that muscular, that peak performance that they're usually at, especially if you see them in shield walls or just on the battlefield at all. Anyone in the battlefield will be at their peak performance levels because if they're not, well, why are you really there? Because you're not going to be able to fight very long. Even medieval knights, I mean, everyone's got to take a break, but if you can't lift your gear, then you're no good on the battlefield. So let's look at orcs now. How are orcs different from dwarves? Well, they're taller, for one thing. Generally like a weird green or pasty gray kind of color, and unintelligent. Not to say they're like unintelligent in the sense that they're just like rodents, because they can speak. They've got their own languages, and they do have to some extent intelligence, but not to the same extent that dwarves have, which dwarves and humans are, generally speaking, in most fantasy settings, are on about the same level when it comes to intelligence. So, in a one-on-one between an orc and a human, well, there's a lot of details involved that you need to get into. What kind of armor are they wearing? What's the battlefield like? Weather, skill sets, weapons, that kind of thing. But if the human has put in less effort into getting into good shape, he's probably going to lose because being in good shape on the battlefield is very important, which orcs don't need to do as much of. Neither do dwarves. But what about elves? Well, when humans hit about 50 or 60 years old, depending on how good of shape they were in through their lives, they kind of stop. Like, they don't stop functioning. We're perfectly functional up until around, like, I don't know, 75 to 80, and then some people kind of aren't as functional as others. But we're not, like, battle ready anymore. We're kind of beyond that point. Whereas elves, look at Elrond. He's several thousand years old, but he still fights in, I think, the Battle of Helm's Deep. It's been a while since I've seen the Lord of the Rings movies. So, even at several thousand years old, he's good to go. Now, Aragorn, I think, is something like 80 years old. Or, I don't know. Again, I haven't watched the Lord of the Rings or read the books in a while, so it's a little foggy. But I think they're just taking some liberties there. So humans don't really have any advantage over one species or another. If you look at the Tau from Warhammer, they're really damn good at ranged combat, so you can't get close, but if you do get close, their weakness is they're terrible at melee. They, no man scares them, but they fear bayonets. Because when they see bayonets charging, if they don't kill you before they're within bayonet range, well, they're kind of screwed. Look at the Eldar, also from Warhammer. They're basically just space elves, and elves are annoying enough as it is, especially if they're not on your team and you have to fight them. But the Eldar just are superior in every way. Better weapons, better technology. Their armor isn't as strong, but that's because it doesn't need to be as strong. Space Marines are a little bit bigger than Eldar, generally speaking, of course. Which makes it harder for them to hit the Eldar, so they don't need as much protection because they're so freaking bouncy. Have you ever tried to play Eternal Crusade and fight Eldar? Shooting them is very hard to do because their hitboxes are this big, whereas a Space Marine, they're significantly bigger. So what other species or races have advantages over humans? Well, look at the elites, or the Senhili from Halo, another very famous sci-fi series. But those, like, just looking at that particular race, not the rest of the Covenant, the recruit elites or the I forget what they're specifically called, but those elites they're just like our humans in armor fighting on the front lines. They're not genetically modified. I've done some reading into the Halo lore, read some books, and I can't find any evidence that says they are. The only major differences between an elite recruit and an elite general is their armor or their energy shields, because an energy shields and something like an elite and an elite ultra, which from Halo Reach, they're pretty damn hard to kill. But a Marine, like a human Marine versus an elite from Halo, that Marine is going to lose because his weapons aren't as good. I mean, they're not as powerful. Because I don't know what they wear in the way of armor. I don't think it'd be Kevlar vests or anything because, let's be honest, Kevlar versus superheated plasma, I don't know a lot about ballistics or anything, but I feel like that wouldn't work very well. Or it would work really well for the plasma and just kill the Marine. Now, if you look at things like the Halo Wars trailers, which are really damn good, the elites don't have energy shields, so whatever armor plating is covering them is the only thing protecting them. And the Marines look like they're actually competent, whereas if you go based on the Halo games, the Marines are just kind of there, and just kind of there, They're getting paid to be there, like the Imperial Guard from Halo, not Halo, Imperial Guard from Warhammer. They're just kind of there, Like, if you're playing Space Marine and you meet some Chaos Cultists, you literally just tap the spacebar, or whatever your jump button is, you do an evasive roll and crush them. Because they're weak and they're unarmored. So they're, well, not unarmored, but against a bolter, which fires rocket-propelled projectiles, well, what are they going to do? So I've noticed that these races, especially if you look at elves in general, like elves, space elves, whatever, they don't really have, as far as I can find, any drawbacks. Like, each other race has a drawback. Humans have several, because we don't really have any advantages over other races. I mean, there are also other races like Skaven, again, Warhammer, or the actual grunts with the little gas tanks on their backs from Halo. They're small, they're weak, they're just, again, they're there just because whatever. But if a human in a one-on-one has any chance of winning a fight against something like an elite, they're going to be genetically modified and wearing power armor, which is more fair, but if it's just a Marine versus one elite, the Marine is kind of screwed. Now, it does depend on the weapons in the battlefield and all that, of course, but later video. So, like, what advantage could humans have? Well, I've been talking it over with a few people, and we agreed that even if humans were like Jedi, we all just had that sixth sense that Jedi have, then that would give us an edge on the battlefield. We'd just kind of be able to predict certain things. We'd be able to sense when people are watching us. And it's not a huge advantage, but it's there, and it's something. Because as it stands, we don't breathe fire. We don't, have, unless you're a wizard, you don't have magic to heal yourself. We've got bandages and stitches, which, they work, but it's not like you wave your hands around and poof, you're healed. I don't think Gandalf ever did that either. I mean, he uses magic in the movies and in The Hobbit as well, but not to the same extent that I've seen in other things. So, back to the main point here. Humans as a species, unless we're genetically modified, like the Space Marines from Warhammer, which are like 7 or 8 feet tall super soldiers, and those are just the Astartes, they get bigger and stronger. So unless we're, genetically modified super soldiers wearing power armor, we don't really stand a chance against a lot of other alien races. Now, again, there are some exceptions. Skaven, the grunts from Halo, things like that. Grots, I think, are like a subspecies of orcs, and they're just like, they're a couple feet tall, they run around with an axe, and they're not really a big threat. So, why would you ever choose to be a human if you could and you're in a sci-fi setting or fantasy? And, let's be honest here, sci-fi is just futuristic fantasy. Changed my mind. So, I can't really think of any reason why I would want to be a human in that kind of setting, especially when I know other races like dwarves. Even if you're a tall dwarf, then you're basically kind of like a human anyway, right? I mean, maybe I'm wrong on that, or maybe I'm wrong on a lot of things here. I'm not a big fan of fantasy, but this is just something that I've noticed over the years, that humans don't have any major advantages over other races the way they do with us. I mean, some of them are really good at long range. Some of them are just literally superior in every way. Longer lifespan, faster regeneration, because if you cut your thumb or something, it'll heal itself over time, but it's, you might want to clean it out, make sure it doesn't get infected. So, what it boils down to is, and there are plenty of other sci-fi and fantasy settings that I'm not touching on, and everyone's got their own interpretation of what this race should be like, what weapons they should have, what their culture is like. In most fantasy, elves have really good eyesight, so they can see in the dark better, which is another reason why, or it's estimated why they like to use bows so much. It might also just be a cultural thing why they use bows, like why dwarves wear axes. Wear axes? Can't wear an axe. Why they use axes. Maybe it's a cultural thing, because a spear would much better suit a dwarf than an axe would, because you get so much more range out of it. But being a human just seems like it sucks. Unless you're genetically modified wearing power armor, you're basically useless against most alien races or most other... I don't know if orcs and urukai and stuff from Lord of the Rings count as alien races, because they're in Middle Earth, but I don't think that's the same as regular Earth. But it's just one of those things that I've thought about, and I've thought, well, why would you choose that if you could choose to be an elf? Because they're just better. Like, yeah, if you shoot an elf in the chest with a bow or a bolter or something with bullets, they're gonna die. Most species will. Brutes from Halo are, not super smart, but they're tough. They're like Wookiees, except I think Wookiees might, I don't know what the intelligence difference is between the two. But, I mean, Chewbacca is small and skinny for his race, and look at how much bigger and stronger he is than Han Solo. A small and scrawny human is like me. I'm lanky. My friends call me Stick Boy all the time because I have like 6-foot long legs. So basically, if humans had some sort of thing that would give us an advantage in battle or an advantage in, any day-to-day activities really, then it might be a little, there might be a little more choice behind it. And some fantasy settings like Oblivion or Skyrim, they don't even have humans. They've got humanoids, they've got Redguards, Bretons, Nords, and all that. But they're not technically, actually humans. They're not called humans. So if humans had a sixth sense, or they were... Because humanity is a pretty tough species anyway. Like, people have survived some crazy stuff. But then again, you look at other races that, as far as we know, don't exist. They probably do the same too. We just don't know about it because we don't talk about it a whole lot. Like, oh, did you hear about that space elf that got shot like 7 times in the chest, but then walked away from it? How often do you hear stuff like that? Anyway, I wanted to ramble about that for a while. I don't know if that made any sense whatsoever, but it's just something to think about. I haven't in all the sci-fi and fantasy that I've seen, because I've seen quite a bit, especially with my siblings. They love fantasy. I mean, to some extent. But I just haven't found any really good reason why humans would be the best option for this setting or this setting. We're just kind of there as a vote of confidence, maybe, just to make each other feel good. Like, oh yeah, we've got these super soldiers, but let's throw in these grunts, these regular humans, just to make them look a little better when we inevitably get blown up because, well, we're just there. We're squishy. Humans are squishy. I mean, most organic life is squishy, but humans are squishy compared to other, heavily armored units. Anyway, I'm going to say that's all for now before I get frostbite out here because it is still pretty cold. It is still winter. It's not as cold out here now. I'm wearing a t-shirt, as you can see. I can feel it in my voice kind of quivering every now and again because it is kind of cold out here. I don't think you can see my breath in the video or not, but anyway, I'm going to go inside before I freeze out here. So I hope you found it at least somewhat entertaining and at least somewhat not a complete and utter waste of time, and kind of think about what I said, which there was a lot, so if you can pick out important pieces or any of that really, that'd be great. I guess that's all I have for now, so if you actually watched the whole thing, thanks for watching, and I suppose have a good one.